We're going to talk today about fear. How does fear affect you? Does it keep you from doing things you really want to do, but you have some fear about doing them? I dealt with this in the short I just did the other day, and I wanted to do more of a deep dive on it in this video. So I'm going to talk today about the ways fear manifests, the things we're really afraid of deep down, and then a couple of things that I use to help overcome fear. So, first of all, fear serves a practical purpose in humans. From an evolutionary perspective, we had to have fear because when we were hunter gatherers and even before, we had a lot to fear out in the world. We had wild animals that could eat us, and there were poison nuts and berries and plants that might kill us if we, ate the wrong thing. And so fear was part of staying alive, actually. You had to be afraid of certain things and avoid them if possible in order to stay alive. The thing is, we don't deal with that kind of threat on a daily basis in our lives today. We don't deal with, wild animals coming after us most days, hopefully. And so we don't need that kind of pervasive fear the way we did. But, our brains, they haven't evolved as quickly as we might hope they have. So the thing is that fear is ever present in most people's minds. Fear is part of our primitive brain inside our head. And so basically it's always going to be there. To wish that you didn't have any fear isn't realistic. Now, some fear, again, serves a good purpose. If you have a fear of walking down a dark alley in the middle of a city at midnight, well, there's probably a good reason for that. It's probably not a good thing to do. And so your brain will go, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And that's probably good to let it stop us from doing that. Or, there's any number of things that fear actually helps us survive a situation. And so that's a good thing. You ever get that spidey sense or whatever that you shouldn't do something, and you're thinking, I don't feel good about this. That's actually probably a good thing. So fear does serve a positive function. But too often what happens is we have irrational fears, which means they're not really based in reality. And also fears of just our own making. They prevent us from taking chances, going and having adventures, trying new things, kind of living outside the, protective envelope that we normally live in. And so when fear does that, it really limits us and restricts us. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit how that works here in a second. But first, I'm actually going to share with you a little bit of an example here. And so I think in other videos I've shared this before, but my mother was a very fearful person. She was afraid of a lot of things. And she kind of instilled some of that in me as I was growing up, especially after my father died, because it was just my mother and I living together alone. And so she would tell me, oh, be careful of this and don't do this and watch out for this. My mother had a really weird habit. Now, I think it arose from something that happened when she was a child. But in asking her about it later, she had no memory of something like this. So I'm not sure she really knew where it came from. But we lived in an apartment in a building on the fourth floor that didn't have a balcony and that had a locked door at the main entrance of the apartments. My mother had 3 locks on the door, basically. So I know some of you that may live in New York City probably have more than 3, but she was very fearful, and she had been raised in the country. I mean, she had been raised in rural Mississippi, and so she didn't grow up in apartment buildings and things like that. So I don't know why, even in an apartment building, which was objectively, let's say, a little safer, she still did not feel safe. Well, one of the things she would do, and I remember sharing this with a psychology class my senior year of high school, and the teacher just, her eyes got really big and she looked at me like, what? Maybe you should talk to me after class. But I shared that when my mother and I would come home from being out for the day, she would have me wait by the door in case I had to make a quick exit or something. And she had this butcher knife that was right by the door, kind of on this table. And she would take the knife and then she would go check the apartment to make sure somebody wasn't hiding under the beds or in the closets. Now, I was like, 12 years old, 11 years old when she started doing this. I don't remember her doing this when my dad was alive. But I kind of thought it was normal. Like, I thought everybody did that. And I never did it when I was like, so I rarely came home and my mother wasn't home until I was probably about 16. So I don't remember ever doing that by myself, but I watched her do this, and she would literally do a sweep of the apartment, and then she'd go, okay, all clear. And then that was my cue to make sure the door was locked behind me, and then we were good. We were all safe while we were home. That's how she viewed it. So it was strange. And I know it must have been based on something that happened in her life, but it was an irrational fear. I don't know why she always thought somebody was going to be hiding waiting for us. I tell you, I'm in my late 60s, and to this day, knock on wood, that has never happened. I have never had somebody waiting in the closet for me to like jump out and scare me. Okay, it's never happened. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm sure it has happened to people, but I don't think it's real likely. So my mother, that was one of her big fears. Basically had to overcome a lot of the fear that I learned by example from her as I got older. And I was able to do that, most of it. Obviously, I still have fears. We all have fears. So I'm going to talk now about like the categories of like, what is it we're so afraid of? And we're going to break that down into, the first one is we're afraid of losing something. So whether it's losing our life or losing our freedom or losing our money or whatever it is, there's a lot of fear associated with losing something. And everybody has this to some degree, but some people have it a lot more than others. And so that's one of the fears that we have that's not always based in reality, but tends to overwhelm us because we're so afraid. We're like, oh, I can't stand to have another loss or another, I just can't go through that. And so because of it, it leaves us sometimes paralyzed by our own fear. The second one is basically fear of the process of something. In other words, we're afraid that something's going to be too hard, so we don't want to do it. Okay, so that could be starting a new exercise routine or starting a new eating habit. Or for myself, I had this intestinal weird thing for about a month. It's pretty much gone at this point. But as a result of it, I came to the conclusion through kind of thinking about everything that could cause it, that I possibly have developed a gluten intolerance. Well, so I've been doing an experiment of basically not eating gluten. So I got some gluten-free bread and whatever. Once I started doing this, I have felt much better. It's apparently gluten is one of those things you can develop an intolerance for at any time in your life. Who knew that? I didn't know that. So am I enjoying doing that? No, I was thinking of all the things I'm really not able to eat anymore. But you know what? It's worth it to me to have my health and to feel good. So I'm doing it. But it's a process, and it's a scary process because I don't enjoy it. It's not fun. I have a lot of fear about like, well, really, what if I really can never eat a croissant again, or pie or, whatever. Like I'm thinking that all the time. So it's a process fear. And so that's one of the things that can, make us unwilling to try new things. Sometimes we're kind of forced into it, like I am by my situation, but sometimes it really is a choice. And sometimes we're just too afraid to do that. And then the third thing is basically a fear of an outcome of something. In other words, I think deep down we're all kind of afraid that if we do something new and we try something new, that what if really nothing gets better in our lives? What if it's, the old saying, it's always greener on the other side of the fence kind of thing, or it's kind of that mentality because we can get a new job or we can move to a new place, but maybe our life wouldn't be any better. And then we'd get disappointed or discouraged or whatever. And there's a fear sometimes of even trying something new because we're afraid of that outcome. We're afraid it's going to be, at the very least, a bummer. And at the worst, it could be, a big setback. We could have lost a lot of money doing it. We could have left a job we really enjoyed or left some friends behind or whatever. There's all sorts of ways the outcome could go wrong. And so I think that also impacts us. So we have those three things, fear of loss, fear of process, fear of outcome. And those are really three broad categories of things that really make us afraid about especially doing new things in our lives. Now, I'm going to share with you now a couple of things that I think have helped me deal with fear. And the first thing is kind of sounds counterintuitive, but it works. First of all, remember, fear, you cannot get rid of fear. You cannot banish fear from your mind. It doesn't work that way. Your brain does not work that way. It is always going to have fear. There was a famous book in the 1980s called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. I think the author was Susan Jeffers. If I'm wrong, correct me in the comments below. But I don't have the book anymore. I had it for years, and then I finally, purged it in one of my moves. And so I haven't read it in a long time, but I remembered it really stuck with me in the 80s. And it was kind of like you're always going to feel fear, but you have to push through it and do things anyway. Well, one of the ways that I find helps is you have to befriend your own fear. You have to befriend your own fear. And you can even give it a name, like an alter ego. Okay? So, I have not given mine a name, but I'm just saying you could. Actually, I've thought about it. But the thing is, you take fear wherever you go and you have a conversation with it. And if the fear is going, I don't know, I don't really want to, I don't want to take that risk, then have a conversation with the fear. Okay, what's going on? Why are you saying that? What's the problem? Talk to me. And you actually can have a conversation just in your head, or you could have it out loud as long as you're not in a crowd and people think you're nuts. So you could do that, and it really might help you talk through the fear. Because you know what? Your fear, it knows what it's afraid of. And if you really probe it, it will tell you. And then you can, once you expose that to the light of day, it kind of loses its power over you, if that makes sense. So befriend your fear. Take it with you. When you make a decision to do something and you have fear around it, fine, take fear with you. Take fear with you in the car. Take it with you to the store. Take it with you to your new job. Take it with you when you move. Have conversations with it on the way as it's having a panic attack, okay? And it sounds silly, but it really is a way to, first of all, kind of detach from it so emotionally by making it this alter ego of yourself, rather than thinking, oh, I'm so afraid, I'm so afraid. No, your fear is afraid, and it's sitting over here. Okay. So I think that's one thing that I know has helped me, is to really be able to look at my fear objectively and really have dialogue with it. Now, the second thing that really helps is to always ask yourself, well, what's the worst that could happen? If I do X, Y, or Z, what is the worst that could happen? Because once you acknowledge what the worst that could happen is, it kind of takes away its power too. Because if you say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? And the worst that could happen is you die. Well, maybe you don't want to do that. Just saying. But very often it's something a lot less than that. It's not something as monumental as, oh, you could die doing this, all right? And so a lot of times, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, I could lose $1,000 if my video last week, I was talking about the risk of moving and having to pay $1,000 and then being behind and whatever. So in that case, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I could be down in $1,000, but I'd still have moved to a new place. So there is, in other words, the worst that could happen is I'm going to lose that money. Well, if I'm willing to do that, if it's worth it to me to make that move, even though I could lose that and be behind and then be further in debt for a while, if I'm willing to face that, then maybe that's the thing to do. However, if I'm not willing to face that, the worst that might happen, then I have to deal with that as well. The thing is, you kind of dissipate the power of the fear as you start asking questions about it. So basically saying, well, what's the worst that could happen? And if the worst that could happen is, falling short of your certain death, then, you might want to take a look at that and you might want to take the chance. So those two things really help me in overcoming fear. The important thing to remember is fear is not going anywhere. You can reduce its impact on you by using a number of strategies like the couple that I proposed here, but you're not going to completely be without fear because fear is part of being human. And it's actually necessary for our survival to some degree. So befriend it, have conversations with it, and ask, what's the worst that could happen? And it might help deal with your next decision that triggers a lot of fear in you. So hopefully that'll help a bit. Until next time, be well, be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.